Hello everyone and welcome to EduQuest. Welcome to this online series where we break down every topic one by one and delve deep into the concepts. So today, let's have a look at all the sections related to English in the SATs. The first section is the reading section, which is for 65 minutes and has 52 questions. The next section is the writing and language section, which is for 35 minutes and has 44 questions. The third and the optional section is the essay section, which is for 50 minutes and you have one task, which means that you have to attempt one essay response in that time. So today we will be dealing with the essay section. So let's have a look at that. So first and foremost, it is important to understand what the essay section actually tests you on. The essay section tests on the student's ability to be able to write a response on the basis of analysis, understanding style and persuasion, and an effective use of language. So when all these things come together, that is how your essay response is formed. In that sense, many may argue that the essay section is actually very similar to the reading section. The only difference is that in the reading section, you have to answer your analysis in terms of an objective format. And over here, you have to write your response in a subjective format, which means you have to properly write everything down and you will not have multiple choice questions. So let me first tell you about the similarities. Basically, since both of these test you on your analysis of the material that has been provided to you, in the reading section, for example, you have to work on your central theme, you have to work on your tone and attitudes, you have to work on your literary devices. Similarly, you have to keep note of all these things in the essay section as well. So you have to be very clear about the central theme of the essay that has been provided to you. You have to be very clear of argument building. The way the argument has been presented to you, you have to be very clear about the tone and attitude so that you can understand style and persuasion in that particular essay. So now that you understand a little bit about the essay section and a little bit about how to write the essay, let's begin and let's analyze the different categories under which you are marked in the essay section. So basically, when you're marked for your essay response, you're marked under the following three categories. The first category is reading skill building. The next category is analysis skill building. And the third category is writing skill building. Now, I'm going to just break down all these categories for you one by one. So let's start with the reading skill building. As the name suggests, the reading skill building is about active reading. Now, many of you might ask what active reading is. Active reading is basically just being alert and being able to understand the key points when you are reading. So when you're reading, you have to read with an analytical eye. That means when you are reading, you have to keep understanding how the particular sample essay is progressing, how the author is, bringing forth the argument one by one. So when you are paraphrasing, so now, whenever you write the essay response, and all these things are going to come together in the end. So don't worry about that. For now, just understand each topic one by one and how to score the most in that aspect. So in reading skill building, it helps you in paraphrasing. Now, a very important part of your essay response is paraphrasing. Many students actually, tend to pick up straight lines from the sample essay and they tend to write it down in their response, which is clearly not suggested. What is suggested is that you have to mark keywords, yes, and then paraphrase and put in those keywords so that your reading skills are very clear to the examiner. The idea is that the student should have read and should know how to extract the information, the necessary information, the precise information in the right format and apply it in the in the response, in your critical response that you will write. Okay, so keep that in mind, and whenever you are reading, I'd suggest that you actively keep marking the keywords. Keywords, mean things that are maybe it's an important aspect, an important term which is put forth by the author. Sometimes, and this is very important to remember, there are a couple of things that are repeated again and again. So a couple of themes, a couple of phrases might be repeated again and again in the passage, in the sample essay that has been given to you in the question. And in that, you have to be very clear that that is very important, because if something is repeated again and again by the author in the essay, that becomes extremely important. And that is what you have to keep into consideration. Always make sure that you make that a part of your response. Now, let's start with a couple of key points that will enhance your reading skill building. First, I've already discussed marking the keywords so that you don't miss them in your response. Second is working on your paraphrasing skills. And that basically means being as brief as possible and being able to write all the information with precision. Because you have to understand that the essay response is, so they don't really give you a word limit, but it is suggested it should be around 500 words. So in those 500 words, you have to understand that you have to write the paraphrasing. And then after that, you will also analyze it and write about, the reasoning, the evidence, all these things we will come to when we study the analysis skill building. But basically, you have to understand that paraphrasing is a part of it, right? That's why you have to be very precise so that you don't overdo it, so that it doesn't feel like, you have just copied the essay straight away. Hence, paraphrasing is very important. The third point to remember is, just for your own organizing, when you're given the question essay, the essay in the question, you will be marked, the essay will be marked, the paragraphs will be marked. So in front of each paragraph, you could probably just write down a word or two, just summarizing the paragraph. And I'll, in the end, we will be discussing, we'll be applying all these things to the essay. So I'll make sure that I teach you how to do that at that point of time. So basically, like, for example, when you have when you have a paragraph which talks about a couple of things, but the main theme of that paragraph is just going to be one, which can easily be summed up in a word or two, or it does not have to be perfect. See, because that's what the essay is all about. It's not restrictive. You have to follow the guidelines, but you don't have to be very, very restricted towards it, right? So yes, in a couple of keywords just for yourself so that you can organize the passage, the essay that you write, yeah, just mark down some keywords over there. Okay, so that is about reading skill building. Now let's come to the slightly difficult and the most important part of the essay, which is analysis skill building. So what do you understand about analysis? This is very important. And I feel that this is very challenging for students as well, because sometimes when we are studying, literature and English in school, schools don't really cater to developing the analysis skill building of students, and hence it becomes a weak point of most of the students. But don't worry, I'll break down everything for you. And in a matter of minutes, you'll be able to apply these things. Understand that analysis is not just about mugging up something. Analysis is not just about picking up things and applying it. It comes with time. So you have to understand the concept. Analysis it comes with time, it comes with practice. Try to understand the concept as deep as you can, because things will not be straightforward in analysis. When you have to analyze passages, it won't be that straightforward. So when you understand the concepts, it will be extremely easy for you to apply. Secondly, what you have to remember is different types of things that we will be discussing right now, because the more things you remember, more the things you'll be able to apply, right? So if you don't, even if you understand, but you don't remember the categories, over there, they might not really strike you. So I like to start with reasoning, because that is the most important part of it. In analysis skill building, you have three major parts: evidence, reasoning, and style and persuasion. Now, just before we begin, I'd like to tell you a couple of things to just understand this overall concept. Think of it as a whole, okay? Think of it as something that the author is actually trying to convey to you. Now, how do you make an argument stronger? To make an argument stronger, to make sure that it has an impact on the reader, what an author does is to use these three things, okay? The aim of all the categories that we will discuss and all the types that we will discuss is always to make the argument stronger, right? So that is something which you should remember when reading all these things. Reasoning is the kind of it's the kind of foundation of the argument. Now, think of it as the structural foundation. The evidence backs up the reasoning, and the style and persuasion also creates an impact using language. So these three things work together in the essay, and you have to recognize all these things. So let's start with the structure, let's start with the foundation, let's start with reasoning. Like I said, reasoning is extremely important. We were discussing the types of reasoning, and here I will explain to you different ways in which reasoning can be done. And so basically various categories, along with, understanding deeply what they are. Like I said, concepts are extremely important in analysis. And I would also like to give you very simple everyday examples so that it is very easy for you to remember them and it's very easy for you to understand them. The first type would be contrast. Now, contrast is basically when the author is giving two situations and contrasting two situations. So basically talking about the dissimilarities between situation A and situation B. Here, I will keep telling you, I'll make sure that you understand how it functions. Because when we're talking about analysis and reasoning, it's not enough to understand what it is. You also have to understand how that functions, how that works, how that leaves an impact on the reader. Now, contrast, okay? For example, if I'm talking about, I'll just take some argument. Say, I'm talking about, this is an argument which, is often given in education. Say, I'm talking about the idea of arts, okay? The importance of arts and music and dramatics in the curriculum. And say I am propagating the idea. So I will give here, if I give two circumstances, school A and school B. School A, for example, does not have arts as a part of their curriculum, and school B has arts as a part of their curriculum. And I'm giving contrast between these two to show that school B actually has better results of the students. They are more focused, maybe they are more creative, which is helping in their overall grades. So here I'm giving the contrast between two situations to prove my point that arts should be a part of the school curriculum for overall development and enhancement of the child. Now, the next type is reciprocity, okay? Reciprocity, as the name suggests, is about mutual obligation. So, mutual obligation about idea of related to idea of justice, fairness. Fairness, as we know, as a society, as everyone believes in this idea of reciprocity. So means that if I give you something, you give me something in return. That is reciprocity, this idea of mutual obligations, right? For example, if I tell you, I want you to get me water because yesterday when you were hungry, I got you food to eat, okay? Here, the only reason why my argument makes sense, the only reason why basically it has a reasoning is because it is based on the idea of mutual obligations. It is based on the idea of mutual, justice and fairness in obligating mutually, right? If I got you something, you have to give me something in return. I have the right to ask you something in return. And if there is a lack of reciprocity, it becomes problematic. Here, the example given is actually quite good. If society refuses to make the necessary investments in early childhood education, why would undeserved young children feel an obligation as adults to help fund the retirements and medical care of those who ignored them in their time of need? Right? So if the society refuses to invest in children, the children won't invest in the elderly, these people when they grow old, right? So lack of mutual obligation. That is what this argument is based on. Then we come to the third type, which is consistency. Consistency is the idea of balance. Consistency is the idea of remaining consistent within different areas. Okay. So the lack of consistency actually leads to contradiction, because if I say something and the other circumstance it does not apply, that means that there is some kind of contradiction. The classic example which I like to tell my students is this idea of, say, behavior towards women. Like, it's a very common thing that we worship female goddesses, but real life women are disrespected, right? Maybe real life women are harassed, or something like that. So what does it show? It shows lack of consistency between, in our attitude towards women. Okay, so if there is a lack of consistency, there is a contradiction in that argument, and that argument becomes invalid. The argument becomes weak when there is a contradiction in the argument. Let's have a look at the example presented here. People are completely opposed to testing experimental medicines and cosmetics on their own pets. Yet, these same people seem to have no trouble purchasing medicines and cosmetics that have been tested on other animals, right? So, a very good example that we mind things being tested on our own pets, but we are okay with using animal tested products. So, obviously, those products have been tested on some animals, right? So, our idea of products not being tested on animals is contradictory, right? Is not consistent in two circumstances, hence lack of consistency. Let's come to the next type. This is cause and effect. Cause and effect basically means when the author is giving the idea how, he is presenting his argument in a way and making the reader understand how one thing leads to another. This is a very scientific way of understanding, of presenting an argument. As we know that cause and effect is something which, is taken from science, happens in science all the time. It's a very logical, extremely scientific way of presenting the argument. So if I say I'm writing a passage on global warming and I talk about the implication of using perfumes, for example, and I talk about the effect of that and what causes global warming, that would be a cause and effect relationship, cause and effect type of argument. Then we come to comparison and analogy. Comparison and analogy is very different from what we discussed earlier. It is contrast. So, what we discussed earlier, meaning like when we discussed contrast. And contrast is about dissimilarities. Comparison and analogy is about similarities. Basically parallels between two different situations. But you have to keep in mind what I told you in the beginning, that both of them aim towards the same thing, making the argument of the author stronger. That is what both of them aim towards. Okay, so taking the same example so that it's clearer to you, the idea about, the whole argument about you having arts as a part of the curriculum, if we have to take the same idea, I would say that, instead of giving contrast, say if we provide school A and school B, both of them, and assume that both of them don't have arts as a part of the curriculum, and then we try to bring out the similarities and the lack of creativity and the lack of maybe mental stimulation in the students of both those schools, that would be comparison and analogy to prove my point. The same point that arts should be a part of the curriculum. Then we come to the final category over here, and that is the rhetorical question. Now, the rhetorical question is actually extremely important and extremely interesting as well. This is when the author is actually presenting you with a question, but it is not really a question because that question contains an answer in itself. Now, that might seem complicated, but let me just break that down for you. If I give you a sentence like, isn't everything fair in love and war? Or, don't all parents want what is best for their children? It appears to be a question, but it actually contains an answer. Don't all parents want what is best for their children implies yes, they do, right? So it's not really a choice that is provided to the reader or something that a reader can answer. It's the leading question, which means that it is used by the author to emphasize on the point because it appears to be a question, but it actually is a statement. All right, after we have discussed reasoning, I would like to go to the next category, which is evidence. And you have to understand that evidence always works with reasoning. So first the author provides you with reasoning of the argument, and then to support the argument there is evidence. The first type of evidence would be statistics. This is very easy. Statistics is about polls, numbers, percentages, just to prove the argument. So for example, if the author is talking about vanishing forests and forest land, and to just support his claim, he tells you that in 2010 the forest land was these many acres and today it has fallen down to these many acres. He's giving you a particular number, he's giving you a random number to show, he's giving you statistics to prove evidence. Now, the second category is authoritative observation and opinion. Much like statistics, this again works on giving the reader concrete proof of what the author is saying, and hence it makes the argument more impactful. It makes the argument more, it has more of an impression on the reader. Impression in the sense of being like, leaving a mark. Okay. So again, like, always given in, working with the reasoning and to support the argument. Authoritative observation and opinion is when the author gives you an opinion of a famous personality in that field or some kind of a authority in that field to prove his point. So, you might give evidence from religious sources like, the Gita. You might give evidence from some famous person, like some president who said something similar, or a very famous writer who is known to write in that field, just to back up the argument, your own arguments. The author backs up his own argument with authoritative observation and opinion. The next category is anecdote. This is, now you have to, like I said, I'll keep making you understand why these things function. So if authoritative observation and opinion functions on the idea of authority, like this hierarchy, backing up your argument with a person who is actually known in that field, right? That builds a hierarchy and it leaves an impression on the reader. In an anecdote, the author is actually talks about his own personal stories and his own personal experiences to back up his argument. So, let's have a look at the argument over here. The early start time for high school is a major problem for students. This is the point that he's making. Let's see the evidence that he gives. When I was of high school age, I found it exceedingly difficult to fall asleep before midnight, despite my best efforts to go to bed around 10 p.m. When the alarm clock woke me up at 6 a.m., I was exhausted and certainly not in the best frame of mind to learn. Now he's giving his own experience. What does that do? It builds an interpersonal relationship with the reader, right? The author is being very informal in his approach. He's almost making conversation. That makes the reader a part of the argument, and that's how it involves the reader in the argument. The next type is historical allusion. This is very easy. This is when the author gives a reference to a historical situation, historical information, something from history to back his point. Again, uses historical language and referring to common facts, common incidents in the history to make his argument stronger. Let's read out the example over here. It is well known that a major consequence of the US Civil War was the end of slavery. How can it be that slavery still exists in our country to this day? Now, the US Civil War here is a reference to history, hence the author is using historical allusion as an evidence. The last category of evidence that we will study today is current events and media. This is when the author cites, sources from media, newsworthy events that are just going around at that time, and the reader as well as the audience, people have a knowledge of it. For example, the tightening of security for the upcoming Olympic Games is a necessary evil in today's society. In order to have secure gatherings, we must sacrifice some of our personal privacy and freedoms. Here, the upcoming Olympic Games is like, almost a part of current events in media. It must be going around at that point of time. Everybody's aware about it when such a major event is happening. So that is reference to current event in media, makes the reader involved again, because, it kind of draws from the common pool of knowledge of current events. So in that way, it becomes very effective. Now, the last category for analysis skill building is style and persuasion. Let me start with telling you how style and persuasion is actually slightly different from the others over here. In style and persuasion, we are specifically looking at the use of language. So keep that in mind. We are understanding how the language used by the author actually impacts the reader, how it impacts the argument, and it impacts the reader. So the first type is sensory language. This type of language is when the reader uses a lot of imagery. Let me explain what imagery means. Imagery actually appeals to senses. It might appeal to sight, appeal to, smell, imagination, brings in the reader's imagination, and that's how it involves the reader. For example, imagine a subway system free of litter. Again, invoking your imagination, right? Where you can sit without having to clean your seat, where you can inhale without feeling like you're in a restroom, right? So the author is making a very stuffy, a very, very, negative kind of an atmosphere, an image in the mind of the reader. So the point becomes very clear. He's able to easily persuade the reader. Now you have to understand that persuasion is not a bad thing here. It's just about using, it's just kind of synonymous with leaving an impact on the reader. The next category is emotional appeal. This is when the author is appealing to the reader's sense of emotions. For example, love, duty, fear, greed, pride, all these emotions to make a point. For example, if I have to talk about, if I have to make an argument about people joining the army, and I say something like, it is your moral duty to give back to the nation which has given you food, shelter, and has always protected you from everything. So that becomes your moral responsibility. The argument is based on appealing to the emotion of the reader. The next category is attack. This is very simple. In this, the author is just, making an attack on something that he does not believe in. So over here, by almost putting down the other idea, he is making his argument stronger. showing his disagreement, basically a slightly extreme use of language of showing disagreement with another argument. The next one is humor. Now, this is very interesting actually. So let's see how humor works. Humor is used in many circumstances by the author. It is a tool that helps the author to actually use, talk about difficult things. So humor makes uncomfortable situations easier. Humor makes uncomfortable situations, lighter, so that neither the author nor the reader becomes uncomfortable with it. Humor is also used to sarcastically point towards something when the author does not want to be direct. Especially, in the world of censorship and all these things, sometimes authors want to use sarcasm and humor to kind of glide through the point that they want to make without getting into too much trouble. Again, a very interesting thing is that humor engages the reader. Humor depends on the idea of relatability. Obviously, if you don't relate to what the author is saying, you won't laugh at the joke. It won't be humorous in the first place, right? So that's how humor works. Okay, so again, an author can make a very sarcastic remark. An author can talk about something lighter. That's just to make the argument to reach the reader, but not make the argument too serious. And humor, now that we are talking about humor, let me just relate it to another category over here. Humor is, I'm talking about informal language. Humor is always, almost always a part of informal language. So whenever the author is trying to make a conversation, he uses informal language, basically day-to-day language, everyday language. And what that does is that it makes the author very, very approachable. It does not create this intellectual hierarchy between the author and the reader. And the reader feels very involved in the argument again. He wants to listen to the author because he's almost talking like a friend. He's almost making a conversation. The next type of language, which is actually very different from this, is formal language. Now, when does the author use formal language? The author uses formal language when he wants to establish a scholarly or intellectual authority. Now, whenever scientific facts are mentioned, difficult terms are used, very scholarly terms are used, that is use of formal language. And that just makes the reader feel that the author has a scholarly superiority. And that's why they're just accustomed to taking those things more seriously. And that's when the author uses formal language. Now let's come to the last category, which is inclusive or exclusive language. Over here, the author gives two categories, two separate categories. This is slightly different, so pay attention to this one. The inclusive and exclusive category is when the author gives us two situations and he expects the reader to associate with one situation and to be separate from the other. For example, if I say, there are two types of people, one who like to keep their room clean and live in a clean environment, and others who like to live like animals. Over here, I am giving two categories of people, but clearly I want my readers to associate with one category, right? So that is inclusive and exclusive language. And with that, we come to the end of our analysis skill building.